The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clanged against the concrete floor of my garage. I was lying under my '67 Mustang, trying to fix a transmission leak that had been driving me crazy for weeks, when I heard Natalie's heels clicking across the driveway. Each step sounded like a countdown timer. "Daniel, we need to talk. Right now." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel, so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I rolled out from under the car, wiping my hands on an old shop rag. My wife stood in the doorway, backlit by the porch light, her arms crossed and her face set in that expression I'd come to know too well, the one that meant someone had been whispering poison in her ear again. "Let me guess," I said, sitting up and stretching my back. "Brittany's been filling your head with more relationship wisdom from her 3 failed marriages?" Natalie's jaw tightened. "This isn't about Brittany. This is about us. About trust." I almost laughed. After 8 years together, she wanted to talk about trust at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, while I was elbow deep in motor oil. The timing alone should have been a red flag, but I was still naive enough to think we could work through whatever drama Brittany had stirred up this time. "Okay," I said, standing and tossing the rag onto my workbench. "What's this about?" "I want to see your phone." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I looked at her face, searching for some hint of what had brought this on, but all I saw was determination mixed with something that looked almost like guilt. "My phone?" I repeated. "Why?" "Because I need to know I can trust you. Brittany says that couples who have nothing to hide should be completely transparent with each other. Phone passwords, social media, everything." I felt a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Not a happy smile. The kind of smile you get when you realize you're about to call someone's bluff. "Brittany said that, huh? The same Brittany who caught her last husband cheating through his Snapchat?" "Don't deflect, Daniel. This is serious." "You're right, it is serious." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it out to her. "Here, knock yourself out. Password is your birthday." Natalie blinked, clearly not expecting me to hand it over so easily. She took the phone, her fingers hesitating over the screen. "Go ahead," I said. "Check my texts, my emails, my browser history. Hell, check my search history if you want. You'll find a lot of auto parts websites and probably some embarrassing Amazon purchases, but nothing that should worry you." She unlocked the phone and started scrolling through my messages. I watched her face, seeing the confusion creep in as she found exactly what I'd promised. Conversations with Marco about the shop, texts with my brother about our parents' anniversary, and a whole lot of nothing that would interest anyone looking for evidence of infidelity. "Now," I said, extending my hand toward her purse, "let me see yours." The change in Natalie's expression was instant and dramatic. Her face went pale, then flushed red. "What?" "No, that's different." "How is it different? You just said couples with nothing to hide should be transparent." "My phone is private. I have client information on there, personal conversations with friends. It's not the same thing." I felt that familiar tingle in my chest, the same feeling I got when I was diagnosing a tricky engine problem, and all the symptoms suddenly started pointing in the same direction. Something was very, very wrong here. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice calm and even. "You can demand to see my phone because you need to trust me, but I can't see yours because it's private." "It's not like that, Daniel. You're twisting this around." "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're applying one set of rules to me and a different set to yourself. That's not how trust works, Nat." She thrust my phone back at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Why are you being so difficult? I'm trying to work on our relationship here. I'm trying to make sure we're solid. By assuming I'm cheating on you? By demanding to search through my private messages while keeping yours locked away? That's not working on our relationship. That's you looking for an excuse to justify something." "Justify what?" but her voice cracked when she said it. I don't know yet, but I'm starting to get some ideas. Natalie's tears were flowing freely now, and she was doing that thing where she made herself look smaller and more vulnerable. It used to work on me. Used to make me feel like a monster for questioning her or pushing back on her demands. You're gaslighting me, she whispered. You're making me feel crazy for wanting reassurance from my husband. I'm not gaslighting you. I'm pointing out a double standard. If you want transparency, it goes both ways. If you want privacy, that goes both ways too. But you can't have it both ways just because it's convenient for you. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make me the bad guy for not playing along with her game. Fine, she said finally. Forget I said anything. Obviously you don't care enough about my feelings to give me the reassurance I need. She turned and stalked toward the house, her heels clicking angrily against the concrete. I watched her go, noting how she clutched her purse and her phone tighter against her body. I was about to follow her inside when I heard the buzz of a phone vibrating. Natalie's phone, which she'd apparently dropped in her dramatic exit. It was lying on the ground near the doorway, screen lit up with a notification. I bent down to pick it up, intending to call after her, when I saw the message preview on the lock screen. Jake, I miss you. Can't wait for tomorrow night. My blood went cold. Jake Foster, the tech entrepreneur who'd been sniffing around Natalie's real estate listings for the past few months. The guy with the Tesla and the expensive suits who always seemed to show up at the same coffee shop where Natalie met her clients. I looked toward the house, where I could see Natalie's silhouette moving around in our bedroom. She was probably up there right now, wondering where she'd left her phone, panicking about whether I'd seen anything. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked back to my workbench. My hands were steady as I opened my toolbox and pulled out a small screwdriver set. If Natalie wanted to play games about trust and transparency, I was about to give her a masterclass in both. The wrench I'd dropped earlier was still lying on the floor where it had fallen. I picked it up and gripped it tight, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Some problems required delicate tools. Others required a heavier touch. I had a feeling I was going to need both before this was over. The next morning, Natalie was all sweetness and light, bustling around the kitchen making coffee and humming like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek when I came downstairs, but I noticed how her eyes kept darting toward her purse, which sat on the counter next to her keys. Sleep well? I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Like a baby, she said, but there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested otherwise. Listen, about last night, I think I was just stressed about the Morrison listing. You know how I get when work piles up. I took a sip of coffee and watched her over the rim of my mug. The Morrison listing. That's the big commercial property downtown, right? Right. It's been really demanding. Lots of late meetings, site visits, that kind of thing. With Jake Foster? The coffee mug slipped from her fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor. Coffee splashed across the white tiles, and Natalie stood frozen, staring down at the mess. How do you know about Jake? She asked quietly. Small town, Nat. People talk. Plus, he's been asking around about commercial properties, and my buddy Tom mentioned seeing you two at Starbucks a few times. It wasn't entirely a lie. Tom had mentioned seeing them together, though he'd described it as looking pretty cozy for a business meeting. I'd filed that information away at the time, not thinking much of it. Now it was starting to make a lot more sense. He's just a client, Natalie said, grabbing paper towels to clean up the spill. A very demanding client. I'm sure he is. I finished my coffee and rinsed the mug in the sink. Well, I better get to the shop. Marco's expecting a parts delivery this morning. I kissed her forehead and headed for the door, but not before slipping her phone out of my pocket and placing it on the counter next to her purse. She was so focused on cleaning up the coffee, that she didn't notice. The drive to Harper's Auto Repair gave me time to think. My shop was on the industrial side of town, wedged between a welding supply company and a place that sold used restaurant equipment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and it had everything I needed for the kind of work I did, both the legitimate kind and the other kind. Marco was already there when I arrived, a stocky guy in his 50s with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and an encyclopedic knowledge of anything with an engine. He'd been my partner for 3 years, ever since he'd helped me catch my previous business partner skimming money from the register. "You look like hell," he said when I walked in. "Trouble at home?" "You could say that." I grabbed a shop coat from the hook near my office. "Marco, how good are you with electronics?" He raised an eyebrow. "Electronics? You mean like car computers and diagnostic equipment?" "More like phones, specifically extracting data from phones." Marco set down the wrench he'd been holding and gave me his full attention. "Daniel, what kind of trouble are we talking about here?" I told him about the previous night, about Natalie's sudden demand for transparency and her refusal to reciprocate. I told him about the text message from Jake Foster and the way she'd reacted when I mentioned his name. "So you think she's cheating?" Marco said when I finished. "I think she's doing something she doesn't want me to know about. Could be cheating, could be something else. But whatever it is, she's projecting it onto me with this loyalty test bullshit." Marco nodded slowly. "And you want to find out what she's hiding?" "I want to know the truth, all of it." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he walked over to his toolbox and pulled out a small device I didn't recognize. "My nephew's in IT, he said. "Kid's a genius with computers and phones. He gave me this little gadget for emergencies. Lets you clone someone's phone if you have physical access to it for about 10 minutes. That's probably illegal. Probably. But so is cheating on your spouse and lying about it." He handed me the device. "Question is, how bad do you want to know?" I looked down at the small black box in my hand. It was about the size of a pack of gum, with a USB port on one end and what looked like a data cable on the other. "What exactly does it do?" "Copies everything. Text messages, call logs, photos, emails, browsing history, app data, everything, even stuff that's been deleted if it's still in the cache." The weight of the device seemed disproportionate to its size. This little box could either save my marriage or destroy it completely. Maybe both. "How does it work?" Marco grinned. "Easy. You plug her phone into it, wait about 10 minutes for the data transfer, then unplug it. The device stores everything and you can review it later on any computer." "And she won't know?" "Not unless she's running some kind of security software, which most people don't. To her, it'll just look like her phone was charging." I slipped the device into my pocket next to my keys. "I'll need to get her phone alone for 10 minutes. "Shouldn't be too hard. Women are always leaving their phones lying around while they shower or do their makeup or whatever." That evening, I got my chance. Natalie announced she was taking a long bath to relax after a stressful day, and she left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close and the water running. Then I unplugged her phone and connected it to Marco's device. The longest 10 minutes of my life. I sat at the kitchen table watching the small LED on the device blink from red to yellow to green, listening to every sound from upstairs. When it finally finished, I disconnected everything and plugged her phone back into its original charger. By the time Natalie came downstairs in her bathrobe, I was in the living room watching the news like nothing had happened. "Feeling better?" I asked. "Much." She curled up next to me on the couch, smelling like lavender bath salts. "I'm sorry about this morning with the coffee mug. I've just been so clumsy lately." "No worries, we've got plenty of mugs." She snuggled closer, and for a moment I almost felt guilty about what I'd done. Almost. Then I thought about Jake Foster's text message and the way she'd refused to show me her phone, and the guilt evaporated. "Daniel," she said softly. "Yeah?" "I love you. You know that, right?" I love you too, Nat. And I did love her. That was the problem. If I hadn't loved her, none of this would have hurt so much. If I hadn't loved her, I wouldn't have cared enough to find out the truth. But I was about to find out just how much the truth was going to cost me. I waited until the next evening to examine the contents of Marco's device. Natalie had gone to what she called a client dinner, something that was becoming increasingly frequent, and I had the house to myself. I connected the device to my laptop and opened the file directory. The sheer volume of data was overwhelming. Thousands of text messages, hundreds of photos, call logs going back months, browser history, app data from Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and a dozen other platforms I'd never heard of. I started with the text messages, specifically looking for conversations with Jake Foster. What I found made my stomach turn. The messages went back 3 months. They started professionally enough. Jake asking about commercial properties, Natalie responding with listings and availability. But by the second week, the tone had shifted. Jake: thanks for showing me the warehouse today. You really know your stuff. Natalie: just doing my job. Jake: maybe I can take you to dinner sometime. To discuss more properties, of course. Natalie: that sounds nice. For business purposes only, obviously. Jake: obviously. It got worse from there. Much worse. Within a month, they were texting multiple times a day. Jake sent her photos of expensive restaurants, luxury cars, his penthouse apartment with its view of the city. Natalie responded with increasingly flirtatious messages and photos of herself. Nothing explicit, but definitely not the kind of pictures a married woman should be sending to a client. The messages from the past week were particularly damning. Jake: I can't stop thinking about Tuesday night. When can I see you again? Natalie: soon. I just need to figure out how to handle Daniel. He's getting suspicious. Jake: maybe it's time to tell him. We can't keep sneaking around forever. Natalie: not yet. I need to be smart about this. He could make things difficult with the divorce if he finds out the wrong way. Divorce. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. She was planning to leave me, and she'd been discussing it with her lover like I was just an obstacle to be managed. I kept reading, my anger building with each message. They mocked me, calling me boring and predictable. Jake made jokes about my work clothes and my truck. Natalie laughed along, sharing private details about our relationship, our finances, even intimate moments between us that she was now using as entertainment for her boyfriend. The photos were even worse. Natalie and Jake at expensive restaurants I couldn't afford. Natalie wearing jewelry I'd never seen before. Jake's hands on her waist, her shoulders, her face. And in the background of several photos, I could see the interior of what was obviously his apartment. But the final straw was a voice message Jake had sent just 2 days ago. Hey, beautiful. I've been thinking about what you said, about Daniel getting suspicious. Maybe we should speed up our timeline. I found a great condo in the city that would be perfect for us. 2 bedrooms downtown, amazing view. We could be really happy there, Nat. Just you and me, no more hiding, no more small-town mechanics dragging you down. Think about it. I sat back in my chair, staring at the laptop screen. The woman I'd been married to for 8 years. The woman I'd supported through real estate school. The woman who'd cried in my arms when her father died. That woman was planning to run away with a rich, pretty boy who saw her as a trophy and saw me as a joke. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was cold and calculating, not the hot anger that makes you punch walls or throw things. This was the kind of anger that makes you very, very careful about what you do next. I copied all the relevant messages and photos to a secure folder on my laptop. Then I started digging deeper into the data. Natalie's browser history revealed searches for divorce attorneys, apartment rentals in the city, and something called How to Hide Assets During Divorce Proceedings. Her email contained correspondence with a lawyer I'd never heard of, discussing strategies for protecting client interests in contested divorces involving business assets. She'd already had a consultation. She'd already started planning how to take half of everything I'd worked for. The final piece of evidence was in her photo gallery. Screenshots of our bank statements, photos of documents from my business, even pictures of the deed to our house. She'd been gathering intelligence, building a case, preparing for war, while I'd been completely oblivious. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the house settle around me. Natalie would be home soon, and she'd kiss my cheek and ask about my day, and probably make some excuse for why she smelled like expensive cologne. But I wouldn't be the same man she'd left behind. The naive husband who trusted his wife, who believed in their marriage, who would have done anything to save their relationship. That man had died somewhere between Jake's voice message and the screenshots of my bank statements. The man who remained was someone else entirely. Someone who understood that if Natalie wanted to play games, I was about to show her what a real player looked like. I heard her car in the driveway and quickly put the laptop away. By the time she walked through the door, I was back on the couch, watching TV and drinking a beer like I'd been there all evening. "Hey, honey," she said, bending down to kiss my forehead. "How was your night?" "Quiet," I said. "Yours?" "Boring client dinner. The Hendersons are thinking about selling their restaurant, but they can't agree on a listing price." She kicked off her heels and sat down next to me. "I'm exhausted." "I bet you are." She curled up against my side, and I could smell Jake's cologne on her clothes, in her hair. She'd probably showered at his place and changed clothes, but she hadn't thought about the scent that lingered. "Daniel." "Yeah?" "Do you ever think about the future? About what you want our life to look like in 5 or 10 years? The question was so loaded, so perfectly calculated to make me reveal my own plans and desires so she could use them against me later, that I almost laughed. "Sometimes," I said. "Why?" "I just want to make sure we're on the same page, that we want the same things." "What do you want, Nat?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I want to be happy. I want to feel like I'm living the life I'm supposed to live, not just settling for what's comfortable." "And you don't feel that way now?" "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if we got together too young, if we never really explored what else was out there." It was almost impressive, the way she could make her betrayal sound like some kind of philosophical journey of self-discovery. She wasn't cheating on me and planning to steal half my assets. She was just exploring what else was out there. "That's an interesting way to put it," I said. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Just thinking." She looked up at me, studying my face in the flickering light from the TV. "You seem different lately, distant." "Do I?" "Yeah, like you're thinking about something all the time, but you won't tell me what it is." I looked down at her, this woman I'd loved and trusted and built a life with, and I felt nothing but cold calculation. She wanted to know what I was thinking about. I was thinking about how to destroy her life as systematically and completely as she was planning to destroy mine. "Just work stuff," I said. "Nothing important." But we both knew I was lying. The question was whether she knew that I knew she was lying too. The game had begun in earnest now. The only question was who would make the first real move. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Natalie announced she was going out of town for the weekend to attend a real estate conference in the city. She'd be staying at a hotel, she said, and would be in meetings most of the time, so I shouldn't expect to hear from her much. Of course, I knew exactly where she'd be staying, in Jake Foster's penthouse apartment, probably ordering room service and planning their future together while I sat at home like an idiot. But this time, I had other plans. I waited until her car disappeared down the street. Then I called Marco. "She's gone," I said. "Time to put our plan into action." Marco had been busy over the past few days. His nephew had provided us with some additional equipment, a GPS tracker small enough to hide in Natalie's car, a voice-activated recording device that could be concealed in her purse, and most importantly, a way to remotely access her phone's camera and microphone. "You sure you want to do this?" Marco asked as we installed the GPS tracker under Natalie's car. "Once we start down this road, there's no going back." "She already started down this road," I said. "I'm just following her to see where it leads." The tracker would show me exactly where she went, how long she stayed, and who she met. The recording device would capture conversations when she thought she was safe, and the phone access would let me see and hear everything in real time. It felt like overkill, but I'd learned something important from examining her digital communications. Natalie was a planner. She was methodical, careful, and always thinking 3 steps ahead. If I was going to beat her at her own game, I needed to be even more thorough than she was. That evening, I got my first real-time intelligence. The GPS tracker showed Natalie's car parked at Jake's building downtown. The phone access let me listen in on their dinner conversation, and what I heard made my blood boil. "I talked to the lawyer again," Natalie was saying. "She thinks we can make a strong case for me getting the house, especially if we can prove that Daniel's business income is higher than what he reports on his taxes." "Is it?" Jake asked. "Probably. Most of these small business owners skim cash to avoid paying Uncle Sam. If we can prove he's been hiding income, it'll work in my favor during the divorce." "What about the business itself?" "That's trickier. It's technically a partnership with Marco, but Daniel owns 60%. The lawyer thinks we might be able to force a sale and split the proceeds." I gripped my phone so hard I thought the screen might crack. She was planning to destroy my business, my partnership with Marco, everything I'd built over the past decade. And she was discussing it over wine and appetizers like it was just another real estate transaction. "When are you going to tell him?" Jake asked. "Soon. I want to have everything lined up first. The apartment lease, the lawyer, maybe even a restraining order if I think he'll make trouble." "A restraining order? Do you think he'd get violent?" "Daniel? No, he's not the type. But it would look good in court, make him seem like the aggressor. My lawyer says judges are very sympathetic to women who claim they're afraid of their husbands." The casual way she said it, like falsely accusing me of domestic violence was just another chess move, made me realize I'd been married to a stranger. The woman I thought I knew would never have considered something so vicious and manipulative. But the woman sitting in Jake Foster's apartment, planning my destruction over expensive wine, was someone else entirely. I listened to them for another hour, gathering intelligence and building my own case. They talked about their future together, about the trips they'd take and the life they'd build. Jake promised to take care of her, to give her the kind of lifestyle she deserved. Natalie talked about how relieved she'd be to finally escape our suffocating small-town life. When they moved to the bedroom, I turned off the audio feed. I'd heard enough for one night. The next morning, I drove to the city myself. I parked across the street from Jake's building and waited. Around noon, they emerged together, Natalie wearing clothes I'd never seen before, and Jake with his arm possessively around her waist. They went to lunch at a restaurant that probably cost more than I made in a week, then shopping at stores where the price tags would have made me laugh if I hadn't been so angry. Jake bought her a necklace, a purse, and a dress that she modeled for him in the store while I watched from across the street. They were completely absorbed in each other, completely confident that they were safe from discovery. Natalie had told me she'd be in meetings all day, but here she was playing dress-up with her boyfriend like a teenager with her parents' credit card. I followed them back to Jake's building, then drove home to prepare for the next phase of my plan. When Natalie returned on Sunday evening, she was full of stories about the conference, the networking opportunities, the valuable contacts she'd made. She showed me a folder full of business cards and brochures, evidence of the elaborate fiction she'd constructed to cover her tracks. "Sounds like it was productive," I said. "Very. I think it's going to really help grow my business." "I'm sure it will." She kissed me goodnight and went upstairs to unpack, and I sat in the living room thinking about everything I'd learned over the weekend. Natalie wasn't just cheating on me. She was systematically planning to destroy my life, steal my assets, and potentially even frame me as an abusive husband to strengthen her position in court. The naive part of me wanted to confront her, to give her a chance to explain or apologize or somehow make this right. But the smarter part of me, the part that had been growing stronger over the past week, knew that confrontation would be a mistake. Natalie had spent months planning her attack. If I was going to defend myself and counterattack, I needed to be just as methodical and just as ruthless. The war was about to begin in earnest, and I intended to win. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a different person. During the day, I went through the motions of being the same old Daniel, working at the shop, coming home for dinner, watching TV with my wife like nothing had changed. But underneath the surface, I was conducting a campaign of surveillance and intelligence gathering that would have impressed a professional spy. Marco became my unofficial partner in the operation. His nephew provided technical support, helping me refine the surveillance equipment and teaching me how to use software that could analyze phone records, track financial transactions, and even monitor social media activity. "You're getting scary good at this," Marco said one afternoon as I showed him the latest intelligence I'd gathered. "Maybe you missed your calling." "Maybe I did," I agreed. "But right now, I'm more interested in not getting screwed over by my own wife." The intelligence I was gathering painted a picture that was even worse than I'd initially suspected. Natalie and Jake weren't just having an affair. They were conducting what amounted to a corporate takeover of my life. Jake had connections throughout the city's business and legal communities. He'd introduced Natalie to lawyers, accountants, and private investigators who specialized in high-conflict divorces. She was building a team of professionals whose job it would be to extract maximum value from our marriage while leaving me with as little as possible. The most disturbing discovery was a series of emails between Natalie and a private investigator named Collins. She'd hired him to dig into my background, looking for anything that could be used against me in court. Collins had investigated my finances, my business practices, even my personal relationships, searching for evidence of infidelity, tax evasion, or anything else that might damage my credibility. The irony was almost funny. While Natalie was cheating on me and planning to commit perjury in court, she was paying someone to investigate me for the same kinds of misconduct she was actually guilty of. But Collins had found nothing because there was nothing to find. I'd been faithful to Natalie throughout our marriage. I'd been honest in my business dealings and accurate in my tax filings. I'd been, in short, exactly the kind of husband she was pretending I wasn't. That gave me an idea. If Natalie wanted to play the victim of a bad marriage, I could give her something to really complain about. If she wanted to paint me as the villain in her story, I could show her what a real villain looked like. But I had to be smart about it. Everything I did had to be legal, documented, and ultimately defensible in court. I couldn't give her any real ammunition to use against me, but I could certainly make her life more complicated. I started small. I began asking questions about her schedule, her clients, her late nights at the office. Nothing accusatory, just the kind of normal spousal interest that any husband might show. But I made sure to ask in front of other people, at dinner parties, at the grocery store, anywhere there were witnesses who could later testify that I'd seemed like a caring, attentive husband. "How was your meeting with the Hendersons?" I'd ask when she came home late. "What meeting with the Hendersons?" she'd respond, having forgotten which lie she'd told me. "You said you were showing them properties tonight." "Oh, right. It went fine." But I knew she'd actually been with Jake, and now she knew that I was paying attention to details she'd assumed I'd ignore. I also started making subtle changes to our routine that would force her to be more creative with her deceptions. I'd suggest dinner dates on nights I knew she'd planned to see Jake. I'd offer to pick her up from client meetings that were actually romantic rendezvous. I'd volunteer to help with work projects that existed only in her imagination. Each time she had to scramble to maintain her cover story, and each time the stress showed a little more clearly on her face. "You're being very attentive lately," she said one evening after I'd offered to bring her lunch at a property showing that I knew was actually a date with Jake. "I'm just trying to be more supportive of your career," I said innocently. "You work so hard." "I appreciate that, but sometimes I need space to focus. Having you there might be distracting for the clients." "Of course, I understand." But what I understood was that she was running out of ways to keep her two lives separate, and the pressure was starting to get to her. The real breakthrough came when I discovered that Jake was planning to propose to her. I found out through the surveillance equipment in her car she'd taken a phone call from Jake while driving to what she'd told me was a networking event. "I got the ring," Jake had said. "It's perfect. 3 carats, platinum setting, exactly what you wanted." "When are you going to ask?" Natalie had responded, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Soon. Maybe this weekend when we're at the cabin. I want it to be special." "What about Daniel?" "What about him? You're going to leave him anyway. This just makes it official." "I know. But the timing has to be right. I can't have him finding out about us before the divorce papers are filed." "Don't worry about Daniel. Once you're wearing my ring, he'll get the message." I sat in my truck outside the coffee shop where I'd been waiting for this conversation to end, staring at the recording device and feeling a mixture of rage and satisfaction. Rage because my wife was planning to accept another man's proposal while still married to me. Satisfaction because she'd just handed me the perfect opportunity to destroy both of their lives. If Jake Foster wanted to propose to my wife, I was going to make sure it was a moment they'd never forget. But first, I had some preparations to make. The cabin Jake had mentioned was his family's retreat in the mountains, about 2 hours north of the city. According to the GPS tracker, Natalie drove there on Friday afternoon, telling me she was attending a weekend seminar on commercial property development. I'd done my homework on the cabin. It was isolated, accessible only by a private road, and surrounded by dense forest. Perfect for a romantic proposal. Also perfect for what I had planned. I waited until Saturday evening, when I knew they'd be having their romantic dinner. Then I drove up to the mountains myself, parked about a mile away from the cabin, and hiked through the woods with a backpack full of equipment. The cabin was everything I'd expected, rustic but expensive, with a wraparound deck and floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a perfect view of the interior. Jake had gone all out for the occasion. There were candles everywhere, rose petals scattered on the dining table, and a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. I set up my equipment in the tree line about 50 yards from the cabin. A high-definition camera with a telephoto lens, a directional microphone that could pick up conversations through the windows, and a small drone equipped with its own camera for aerial shots. I wanted to document everything, not just for my own satisfaction, but because I was going to need evidence of their relationship for the divorce proceedings. And if I was going to gather evidence, I might as well make it comprehensive. They were just finishing dinner when I arrived. Natalie was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, and Jake was dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They looked like something out of a magazine, the successful entrepreneur and his beautiful girlfriend, celebrating their love in their private mountain retreat. It would have been a perfect romantic scene, if not for the fact that the beautiful girlfriend was married to someone else. I watched through the camera lens as Jake stood up and walked around the table to where Natalie was sitting. He got down on one knee, and even from 50 yards away, I could see the diamond ring sparkling in the candlelight. "Natalie," he said, his voice clear through the directional microphone, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what real love feels like, what it means to want to spend forever with someone." Natalie was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth in what looked like genuine surprise and joy. "I know this is complicated," Jake continued. "I know we have some obstacles to overcome, but I can't wait any longer to make this official. I love you, and I want the whole world to know it. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Natalie whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed passionately while I recorded every second of it. Then they moved to the couch, where Jake poured champagne, and they toasted their engagement. "To our future," Jake said, raising his glass. "To our future," Natalie agreed, "and to finally being free to be together." "How soon can you file for divorce?" Jake asked. "My lawyer says we should wait another month or two. Let me gather a little more evidence about Daniel's business income. But after that, we can move forward." "And you're sure he won't fight it?" "He might try, but he doesn't have the resources to go up against my legal team. Besides, once he finds out about us, he'll probably be so humiliated that he'll just want it over with as quickly as possible." They talked for another hour about their plans. The wedding they'd have after her divorce was finalized, the house they'd buy together, the trips they'd take. Jake talked about introducing her to his family and his business associates. Natalie talked about finally escaping what she called the suffocating mediocrity of her marriage to me. It was fascinating, in a horrifying way, to hear my wife discuss our 8-year marriage like it was a prison sentence she was finally escaping. She talked about me like I was some kind of anchor that had been holding her back from her true potential, rather than the man who'd supported her through real estate school, helped her start her business, and loved her unconditionally for nearly a decade. But the most revealing part of their conversation came near the end of the evening, when they were both a little drunk on champagne and honesty. "I feel bad about Daniel sometimes," Natalie said, curled up against Jake's side on the couch. "He's not a bad person. He's just limited." "Limited how?" "He has no ambition, no vision for anything bigger than his little repair shop and his little house in his little town. He's content with mediocrity, and I can't live like that anymore." "You won't have to," Jake assured her. "Once we're married, you'll never have to settle for anything less than the best again." "I know. It's just, he's going to be devastated when he finds out. Part of me wishes there was a way to do this without hurting him so much." "There isn't," Jake said bluntly. "But that's not your fault. He should have seen this coming. If he'd been a better husband, if he'd given you the life you deserved, none of this would be happening." "You're right," Natalie agreed. "I gave him 8 years to make me happy, and he couldn't do it. That's on him, not me." I turned off the recording equipment and packed up my gear. I'd heard enough for one night, and I had what I came for: comprehensive documentation of their affair, their engagement, and their plans to destroy my life. But more than that, I had something else: absolute moral clarity. Any guilt I might have felt about what I was planning to do to them had just evaporated. They weren't just betraying me. They were rewriting history to make themselves feel better about it. According to their version of events, I was the villain who'd failed to give Natalie the life she deserved. I was the small-minded husband who'd held her back from her true potential. I was the obstacle that had to be removed so they could live happily ever after. Well, if they wanted a villain, I was happy to oblige them. But first, I had to get home before Natalie did. She'd be returning Sunday evening with stories about her educational seminar, and I needed to be there to hear them. I needed to look her in the eye as she lied to me about where she'd been and what she'd done, because that would be the last time she'd have the advantage of thinking I didn't know the truth. After that, the real game would begin. Natalie came home Sunday evening glowing with what she claimed was enthusiasm for new marketing techniques she'd learned at her seminar. She showed me a notebook full of fake notes and talked excitedly about implementing new strategies for her real estate business. But I could see Jake's engagement ring hanging from a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her blouse. She'd taken it off her finger for the drive home, but she couldn't bear to leave it behind entirely. "Sounds like it was a productive weekend," I said, watching her carefully. "Very productive. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on my career." "That's great, honey. I'm glad you're feeling inspired." She kissed me goodnight and went upstairs to unpack, and I sat in the living room making final preparations for what was about to happen. I'd spent the drive home from the mountains planning my next move. I could have confronted her immediately with the evidence I'd gathered, but that would have been reactive, emotional, ultimately unsatisfying. Instead, I was going to do something much more calculated. I was going to give her exactly what she thought she wanted, but in a way that would destroy her in the process. The next morning, I called in sick to work and told Marco I needed him to handle things at the shop for a few days. Then I drove to the city and paid a visit to Collins, the private investigator Natalie had hired to investigate me. "Mr. Harper," he said when his secretary showed me into his office, "this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is. I imagine most husbands don't drop by to chat with the private investigators their wives have hired to spy on them." Collins was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than having this conversation. "I'm not sure what you think you know, but I can't discuss my clients or their cases." "Oh, I don't want to discuss your case," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I want to hire you myself." "Excuse me? You've been investigating me for my wife. Now I want to hire you to investigate her for me. Seems fair, doesn't it?" Collins stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. "Mr. Harper, I can't represent both parties in a domestic dispute. It's a conflict of interest." "Then you'll have to choose. My wife hired you to find dirt on me, and you came up empty because there isn't any dirt to find. But I can guarantee you that if you investigate her, you'll find more than enough to earn your fee." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a check I'd already written. "This is twice what she's paying you. All I want is a comprehensive report on her activities, her finances, and her associates, particularly her relationship with Jake Foster." The mention of Jake's name made Collins's face go pale. He knew exactly who Jake Foster was and what his relationship with Natalie meant. "How did you know about Jake?" "Let's just say I'm more observant than my wife gives me credit for." I slid the check across his desk. "The question is whether you want to keep working for the cheating wife who's been lying to you about her motives, or start working for the husband who's offering to pay you twice as much for information you probably already have." Collins looked at the check, then at me, then back at the check. "What exactly do you want to know?" "Everything. How long the affair has been going on, where they meet, what they've spent on each other, what their future plans are. I want a complete dossier on their relationship and a detailed financial analysis of how much money she's spent on this affair, using our joint accounts. And what do you plan to do with this information? That's not your concern. Your job is to gather facts, not judge what people do with them." Collins was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the ethical implications of switching sides in the middle of an investigation. But the check I'd written was substantial, and private investigators aren't known for their high moral standards when it comes to client loyalty. "I'll need a week," he said finally, taking the check and sliding it into his desk drawer. "You've got 3 days. And Collins? If you warn my wife about this conversation, I'll make sure every divorce attorney in the city knows that you can be bought by whoever writes the biggest check." I left his office and drove across town to my next stop, the law firm where Natalie had been consulting about our divorce. I didn't have an appointment, but I'd learned that sometimes the direct approach works better than subtlety. "I'd like to speak with Margaret Chen," I told the receptionist. "Tell her Daniel Harper is here to discuss his wife's divorce plans." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked like she ate opposing counsel for breakfast. "Mr. Harper," she said, "I have to tell you that I can't discuss anything related to your wife's consultation with our firm." "I'm not here to discuss her consultation," I said. "I'm here to hire you myself." "I'm sorry, but that's not possible. I've already met with your wife about this matter, which creates a conflict of interest." "Actually, it doesn't." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared and slid it across her desk. "According to the state bar's ethics guidelines, you can't represent both parties in the same divorce, but you can drop one client and take on the other, as long as you don't use confidential information from the first consultation." Margaret Chen opened the folder and scanned the ethics opinions I'd printed out. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she read. "You've done your homework," she said. "I have, and I'm prepared to pay a substantial retainer to secure your services before my wife has a chance to finalize her representation with your firm." "What makes you think I'd be willing to drop your wife as a client?" "Because she's planning to commit perjury in court, and lawyers don't like clients who lie to them." I pulled out another folder, this one containing selected transcripts from the surveillance recordings I'd made. "This is just a sample of the evidence I have regarding her affair and her plans to make false accusations against me in court." Margaret Chen read through the transcripts, her expression growing more serious with each page. When she finished, she looked up at me with what might have been respect. "Where did you get these recordings?" "That's not important. What's important is that they're authentic, and they demonstrate that your potential client is planning to suborn perjury and make false statements in court proceedings. And you want me to represent you instead. I want you to represent the party who's telling the truth. I assume that as an officer of the court, you'd prefer to avoid representing someone who's planning to lie under oath." She was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents I'd provided. Finally, she looked up at me and smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind of smile a predator gives when it spots wounded prey. "Mr. Harper, I think we should discuss your retainer." By the time I left her office, I'd secured representation from one of the best divorce attorneys in the city, the same attorney my wife had been planning to use against me. I'd also provided enough evidence to ensure that if Natalie tried to hire a different lawyer, Margaret Chen would be able to provide testimony about the perjury Natalie was planning to commit. It was a devastating tactical move, and it was completely legal. Natalie had made the mistake of consulting with an attorney before she was ready to file, and now that attorney was working for me instead. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more stop to make before I went home to wait for Collins's report. I drove to Jake Foster's office building and took the elevator to the 32nd floor, where his tech company occupied half the floor in a gleaming suite of glass and chrome. "I'm here to see Jake Foster," I told the receptionist. "Tell him Daniel Harper would like to discuss a business proposition." Jake kept me waiting for 20 minutes, probably hoping I'd get nervous and leave, but I was perfectly comfortable sitting in his expensive lobby, reading business magazines and admiring the view of the city. When he finally agreed to see me, he looked exactly like I'd expected. Tall, handsome, expensively dressed, and completely confident that he was smarter and more sophisticated than the small-town mechanic who'd married the woman he was sleeping with. "Mr. Harper," he said, extending his hand with a politician's smile, "this is unexpected. What can I do for you?" "You can stay away from my wife." His smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. You're talking about Natalie Grant Harper, the married woman you've been having an affair with for the past 3 months, the woman you proposed to this weekend at your family's cabin." Now the smile disappeared entirely. Jake's face went pale, and I could see him trying to figure out how much I knew and how I'd found out. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. I have photographs, recordings, financial records, and enough evidence to destroy both of your reputations if I choose to make it public." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope containing selected photos from the weekend's surveillance. I spread them across his desk, images of him proposing, of them kissing, of Natalie admiring her engagement ring. Jake stared at the photos in horror. "How did you get these?" "That's not important. What's important is what I'm going to do with them." "What do you want?" "I want you to break up with my wife. Publicly, humiliatingly, and permanently." "I'm not going to do that." "Yes, you are. Because if you don't, I'm going to send copies of these photos to every business contact you have, every investor in your company, and every social media account associated with your name. I'm going to make sure everyone knows that Jake Foster is the kind of man who seduces married women and destroys families. Jake's hands were shaking as he looked through the photos. You can't do this. This is blackmail. No, it's consequences. You made a choice to have an affair with a married woman. Now you get to live with the results of that choice. What about Natalie? What are you going to do to her? That's between me and my wife. Your only concern is staying away from her. I gathered up the photos and put them back in the envelope. You have 24 hours to end your relationship with Natalie. If you don't, these photos go public, along with recordings of your conversations about destroying my business and stealing my assets. I stood up and headed for the door, then turned back to deliver my final message. Oh, and Jake, if you warn her about this conversation, I'll know about it within an hour. And if that happens, our deal is off. I left him sitting at his desk, staring at the spot where the photos had been, probably wondering how his perfect plan had gone so completely wrong. The drive home gave me time to think about what I'd accomplished in one day. I'd turned Natalie's private investigator into my own asset, stolen her divorce attorney, and neutralized her lover's support. In less than 8 hours, I'd systematically dismantled the entire network she'd spent months building to destroy me. But the best part was still to come, because now I got to go home and pretend that nothing had happened, while Natalie's carefully constructed world fell apart around her. The war was almost over, and she didn't even know it had begun. The next 48 hours were the most satisfying of my entire marriage. I watched Natalie go through her normal routine, meeting with clients, showing properties, making dinner conversation, while her secret life disintegrated behind the scenes. Jake called her Tuesday morning. I listened to the conversation through the surveillance equipment I'd installed in her car. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight with stress. "What's wrong? You sound upset." "Not over the phone. Meet me at our usual place in an hour." "Jake, you're scaring me. What happened?" "Just meet me there. And Natalie? Don't wear the ring." I followed her to the coffee shop where they usually met, parking across the street with a clear view of their table. I could see Jake's face through the window, pale, nervous, constantly checking his phone like he was expecting bad news. When Natalie arrived, she looked confused and worried. She sat down across from him and reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "We have a problem," he said. "What kind of problem?" "Daniel knows about us." The color drained from Natalie's face. "What? How is that possible?" "He came to my office yesterday. He had photos, recordings, evidence of everything. The proposal, the cabin, all of it." "That's impossible. He's not smart enough to—" "Apparently he's smarter than we thought. He knows about the affair, about our plans, about the divorce strategy. He knows everything." I watched Natalie process this information, seeing her mind race through the implications. "What did he want?" "He wants me to break up with you. Publicly and permanently." "And what did you tell him?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his coffee cup. "I told him I'd think about it." "You told him what?" Natalie's voice rose loud enough that other customers turned to look at them. "He has photos, Nat. Professional quality surveillance photos of us together. If he releases them, it'll destroy my business, my reputation, everything I've worked for. So you're just going to abandon me after everything we've planned?" "I'm not abandoning you. I'm trying to figure out how to handle this situation." "There's nothing to figure out. We knew this day would come eventually. We just have to move up our timeline." "It's not that simple anymore. He's not the clueless husband we thought he was. He's been playing chess while we were playing checkers." I could see Natalie getting more agitated, her voice getting louder and her gestures more dramatic. "So what are you saying? That you don't want to be with me anymore?" "I'm saying that maybe we need to take a step back and reassess the situation." "A step back? Jake, you proposed to me 3 days ago." "I know, but that was before—" "Before what? Before you found out that standing up to my husband might require some actual courage?" Jake's face flushed red. "That's not fair. isn't it? You were perfectly happy to sleep with me when you thought there wouldn't be any consequences. But now that there might be some actual risk involved, you're ready to run back to your safe little bachelor life. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're choosing your business over our relationship. Jake looked around the coffee shop, clearly uncomfortable with how public their argument was becoming. Can we please keep our voices down? No, we can't keep our voices down. I'm tired of hiding, tired of sneaking around, tired of pretending that what we have isn't real. What we have is real, but not real enough for you to fight for it when things get complicated. I could see Jake struggling, torn between his feelings for Natalie and his fear of what I might do to his carefully constructed life. It was almost pitifully to watch, this successful, confident businessman reduced to a nervous wreck by the threat of exposure. I need some time to think, he said finally. Time to think about what? About how to handle this. About what our options are. Our options are simple. We stick to the plan. I file for divorce, we weather whatever storm Daniel tries to create, and we move on with our lives together. And if he releases those photos, if he destroys both of our reputations, then we deal with it. Together, like people who love each other are supposed to do. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the exact moment when he made his decision. His shoulders sagged slightly, and when he looked up at Natalie, there was something like resignation in his eyes. I can't do it, Nat. I can't risk everything I've built for this relationship. The silence that followed was deafening. Natalie stared at him like he'd just slapped her, her mouth slightly open in shock. You're breaking up with me, she said quietly. I'm saying that maybe we moved too fast. Maybe we need to slow down and think about this more carefully. No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to seduce me away from my marriage and then abandon me when things get difficult. I didn't seduce you away from anything. You were already unhappy in your marriage. Because you convinced me I could have something better. You made me believe that we had a future together. We do have a future together. Just maybe not the future we originally planned. Natalie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're a coward, Jake Foster. And I was an idiot to think you were any different from every other man who's too selfish to fight for what he wants. She stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving Jake sitting alone at the table with his head in his hands. I watched him for a few more minutes, enjoying the sight of his misery, then drove home to wait for Natalie's return. She came through the front door like a hurricane, slamming it behind her and throwing her purse across the living room. Her face was streaked with tears and mascara, and her carefully styled hair was disheveled from running her hands through it. Rough day at the office? I asked from my position on the couch. She spun around to face me, and for a moment I thought she was going to confess everything. Instead, she just stared at me with a mixture of rage and desperation. You know, don't you? She said finally. Know what? Don't play games with me, Daniel. You know about Jake. I set down the beer I'd been drinking and looked at her with what I hoped was the appropriate level of surprise and hurt. Jake Foster? Your client? He's not just my client, and you know it. Actually, I don't know it. Why don't you tell me? She collapsed into the chair across from me, suddenly looking exhausted. I've been having an affair for 3 months. We were planning to get married after I divorced you. The casual way she said it, like she was discussing the weather, was almost more insulting than the affair itself. No apology, no explanation, no show of remorse, just a flat statement of fact delivered like she was reading from a grocery list. I see, I said. And how did that work out for you? He broke up with me today. Apparently he's not as brave as he pretended to be. Imagine that. A man who's willing to sleep with someone else's wife, but not willing to face the consequences. What are the odds? Natalie looked up at me sharply. You're not surprised. Should I be? You've been acting strange for months, staying out late, being secretive about your phone, picking fights over nothing. Either you were having an affair or you'd developed a serious drug problem. And you didn't say anything? What was I supposed to say? Hey, honey, are you cheating on me? You would have denied it, and then we'd have had a fight about my lack of trust in you. So you just waited? I waited to see what you were going to do, whether you were going to come clean or keep lying to me. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. You're different than I expected. Different how? I thought you'd be angry. I thought you'd yell and throw things and make a scene. Would that make you feel better? If I had a breakdown and gave you an excuse to paint me as the unstable husband? Her eyes widened slightly. How did you know about your plan to claim I was abusive? Lucky guess. I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how much I actually knew versus how much I was bluffing. The uncertainty was eating at her, which was exactly what I wanted. So what happens now? She asked. Now we get divorced. Cleanly, quietly, and equitably. Equitably. 50-50 split of assets, no alimony, no false accusations, no attempts to destroy each other's reputations or businesses. And if I don't agree to that? I smiled at her, not a warm smile, but the kind of smile a chess player gives when they're about to announce checkmate. Then I release the evidence I have of your affair, your perjury plans, and your attempts to steal marital assets. I make sure everyone in town knows exactly what kind of person you really are. You're bluffing. Am I? Would you like to see the photos from Jake's cabin last weekend? Or maybe listen to the recordings of you planning to lie in court about me being abusive? The last bit of color drained from her face. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting myself from my wife's attempts to destroy my life. There's a difference. Natalie sat in stunned silence for several minutes, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage her original plan. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect. You're not the man I thought I married, she said. No, I agreed. I'm not. The man you married was naive enough to trust you. The man sitting here now knows exactly who you are and what you're capable of. So this is it? 8 years of marriage, and it ends like this? It ended the day you decided to cheat on me and planned to destroy my life. This is just the paperwork. She nodded slowly, like she was finally accepting the reality of the situation. What about Jake? What about him? Are you going to release those photos anyway? That depends on whether he stays away from you and keeps his mouth shut about our arrangement. And me? What do I get out of agreeing to your terms? You get to walk away with half of everything we built together, which is more than you deserve. And you get to avoid having your reputation destroyed and your real estate license revoked for fraud. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she stood up and walked toward the stairs. I'll have my lawyer contact yours tomorrow, she said without turning around. Actually, you'll need to find a new lawyer. Margaret Chen is representing me now. She stopped halfway up the stairs and turned to look at me with genuine shock. You stole my lawyer? I hired the best divorce attorney in the city. The fact that you'd consulted with her previously just made it more convenient. For the first time since she'd walked in the door, Natalie smiled, a rueful, almost admiring expression. Checkmate, she said. Checkmate, I agreed. She went upstairs to pack her things, and I sat in the living room finishing my beer and thinking about how completely my life had changed in the span of a few weeks. The naive husband who'd trusted his wife was gone forever, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it was definitely a permanent thing. The war was over, and I had won.